My husband let his team call me a trophy wife all night, then stayed silent when they said I probably think Python is just a snake. When I tried to stand up for myself, Finn cut me off to explain crypto, like money but on computers, and Jax showed me LinkedIn, in case I'd never heard of it. I stayed silent. That was 4 days ago. This morning, Jose was deleting tweets. Jasmine couldn't look me in the eye, and Archie finally said the words, "I should have defended you." It all started when I showed up to my husband Archie's startup launch party in a little black dress and heels, carrying a designer purse that apparently screamed, "I married for money," louder than a fire alarm in a library, while his hoodie-wearing colleagues looked at me like I was a poodle at a wolf convention. The party was at one of those trendy co-working spaces that smell like cold brew and broken dreams, packed with 20-somethings who code first and shower third, and there I was, the apparent anomaly who dared to wear something dry clean only. Archie introduced me to his team, and I swear I could see their thought bubbles forming above their heads like dialogue boxes in a video game. Achievement unlocked. Boss married someone hot. Jax, the lead developer who looked like he'd been personally victimized by a barbershop, immediately started explaining what a startup was, speaking slower than dial-up internet, as if I'd wandered in from an alternate dimension where technology hadn't been invented yet. When I asked about their Series A funding goals, he literally said, "Oh wow, you know what Series A means," with the same shock as discovering your goldfish can do calculus, then proceeded to explain it anyway, comparing it to, like when you go shopping and need more money for a really expensive purse. Finn, their CTO, whose personality was as flat as a deprecated API, kept directing all technical conversation away from me, actually telling me that coding was kind of like following a really complicated recipe, but for computers instead of cookies. The UI designer, Jose, asked if I worked, with air quotes so aggressive they could have been classified as assault, and when I said I worked in venture capital, he laughed and said, "Oh, like a receptionist at one of those firms?" As if the concept of me doing anything beyond answering phones was more far-fetched than their startup's profitability projections. Sadly, Archie got pulled away on business, so I had to play the nice host. Throughout the night, they kept making these little jokes about trophy wives, with Finn actually saying their startup was too complicated for someone who probably thinks Python is just a snake, while Jax added that I probably married Archie for his future potential earnings, which was rich coming from someone whose current earnings were apparently in equity and energy drinks. Jasmine, the only female developer, tried to bond with me by complaining about how some women just coast on their looks, while literally looking at my shoes like they were proof of my moral failings. Jose made a crack about how I probably thought their burn rate was something that happens at the gym, which might have been funnier if he looked like he'd ever seen the inside of one. The kicker came when they started discussing their funding troubles, lamenting about how their mysterious angel investor, who they only knew as Phoenix Capital, had been their only lifeline, with Jax actually saying, "At least someone with actual business sense believes in us, unlike people who just marry into tech," while looking directly at me like I was the poster child for Gold Diggers Anonymous. They went on and on about how Phoenix Capital was probably some brilliant tech mogul who understood their vision, definitely a he who'd built his fortune through innovation, not marriage, and I just sipped my wine. When Archie tried to mention my work, Finn literally interrupted to explain cryptocurrency to me, starting with, "Imagine money, but on computers," while Jax pulled out his phone to show me this cool app called LinkedIn, where professional people network, as if I'd been living under a rock that didn't have Wi-Fi. Archie went to correct them, but I just waved my hand dismissively. The conversation reached peak condescension when Jose suggested I should start a blog about being a startup wife, because it's like having a diary, but on the internet, and Jasmine added that maybe I could write about fashion since that was probably more your speed than technical stuff, all while they complained about the challenges of finding good investors who actually understood technology. That's when Finn mentioned they were preparing for their next funding round, hoping to expand beyond with the help of Phoenix Capital, and Jax joked that maybe I could ask my rich housewife friends if their husbands wanted to invest, because apparently my social circle consisted exclusively of Real Housewives casting rejects. The beautiful moment of cosmic justice arrived when Archie, bless his heart, finally had enough and innocently asked, "Why don't you tell them about Phoenix Capital, honey?" And I got to watch their faces go through all 5 stages of grief faster than a crashed server recovery. I simply mentioned that Phoenix Capital was actually my private firm, established 5 years ago after I sold my first startup. You know, the little payment processing company they probably used to buy their hoodies online. Suddenly the room got a lot quieter. Jax's face went through more color changes than a RGB gaming setup. Finn started stammering like a corrupted audio file. Jose looked like he'd just divided by 0. And Jasmine suddenly found the floor more interesting than any user interface she'd ever designed. The best part was watching them try to backpedal faster than a failed deployment rollback. I watched Jax's energy drink slip from his hand in what felt like slow motion, the can hitting the concrete floor with a metallic crash that sent monster energy spraying across his limited edition sneakers. The fizzing liquid pooled around his feet while he stood frozen, mouth opening and closing like a fish discovering air doesn't work for breathing. Finn's laptop appeared in his hands faster than a startup pivoting after bad user feedback, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up the Secretary of State website to verify Phoenix Capital's registration details. The trembling in his hands made the laptop shake as the search results loaded, and I took another sip of wine, savoring the moment like a perfectly timed product launch. Jose had gone pale under the industrial lighting, his phone appearing in his hand as he started frantically texting someone under the table, probably trying to do damage control with whoever would listen. Jasmine's face went through several expressions as she discovered my LinkedIn profile on her phone, her eyes widening at each line of my bio. The bartender chose that moment to slide another glass of wine across the bar to me, his knowing smirk suggesting he'd been following the drama better than any reality show. He leaned in close enough for me to catch his whispered words about seeing my TechCrunch feature last year, the one about female founders disrupting traditional VC models. I nodded my thanks while drumming my fingers on the bar, my wedding ring catching the overhead lights in a way that seemed to hypnotize the startup team. I had 2 options stretching out before me like diverging code branches. I could leave immediately, pull every cent of funding, and let them scramble for survival in a market less forgiving than a memory leak in production. Or I could stay and twist the knife deeper, making sure they understood exactly exactly who they'd been dismissing all evening. The choice crystallized as I watched Finn's face drain of color while reading something on his screen. I made my decision, turning to face him with the sweetest smile I could manage. I asked him to please continue his cryptocurrency explanation, adding that as just a trophy wife who didn't understand computers, I was finding his tutorial so educational. The sarcasm dripped heavier than their burned coffee, but Finn was too panicked to catch it, launching into a stuttering explanation about blockchain technology while his eyes kept darting to his laptop screen. Archie chose that moment to return from his call, stopping short when he saw his entire team huddled around Finn's laptop like moths around a particularly horrifying flame. They were so focused on searching my professional history that they didn't notice me stepping behind them, reading over their shoulders as they scrolled through my credentials. The Forbes 30 Under 30 profile loaded just as I leaned in closer, and I could see my own professional headshot reflected in Finn's wine glass. I asked if they'd found anything interesting, and the effect was immediate. Finn slammed the laptop shut so hard I worried for the screen, all of them spinning around to face me like synchronized swimmers who'd forgotten their routine. Jax immediately launched into damage control mode, his words tumbling over each other as he claimed his earlier comments were just startup culture humor. You know how it is, while his thumbs moved across his phone screen, probably warning other angel investors about the situation. The universe had perfect timing when Marcus walked in, Archie's childhood friend and company advisor who'd known me since before Phoenix Capital existed. He took one look at the scene, from the spilled energy drink to the panicked faces to my calm smile, and his eyebrows rose toward his hairline. His comment about them finally finding out who signs their checks sent another wave of color draining from already pale faces. I noticed Jose screenshotting their company's funding announcement from TechCrunch, the one that mentioned Phoenix Capital as lead investor with glowing praise for the mysterious backer's track record. His fingers fumbled with the phone as he tried to save the evidence, probably realizing how many times they'd referenced this very article in their pitch decks. Jasmine quietly excused herself, mumbling something about the bathroom, but I caught her lingering by the exit, her body language screaming internal debate about whether to flee entirely. Archie attempted to smooth things over with his trademark optimism, suggesting we all sit down and start fresh, like this was just a minor bug that could be patched with a quick fix. Phoenix Capital being her firm all along? That's quite the twist they walked right into. Makes me wonder how long she's been funding them without revealing herself. Was this always the plan, or did their behavior tonight push her to this reveal? But I noticed what he wasn't doing, defending me or addressing his team's behavior. His conflict avoidance was showing, the same trait that probably let this toxic culture fester in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner, the notification preview showing just enough for me to see it was a screenshot. I opened it to find Jax's tweet from an hour ago, complete with nail polish emoji and the kind of casual sexism that tech bros think is humor. 47 people had already liked it, their names a who's who of the local startup scene. I saved the screenshot to my growing evidence folder, adding it to the collection I'd been building all evening. Finn suggested moving the conversation to the conference room for privacy, his voice cracking on the last word. The real reason was obvious. He wanted to control the narrative and prevent other party guests from witnessing their humiliation. The startup world was small, and gossip traveled faster than a viral tweet. I watched him exchange glances with Jax, both of them clearly strategizing their next move. Another notification lit up my phone, this time from the startup's potential Series B lead investor. The message was short but loaded with implications, asking if everything was okay with Phoenix's position given the drama at Archie's party. Word was already spreading through the investor network, the kind of wildfire that could torch reputations faster than you could say burn rate. The co-working space manager, who they'd been desperately trying to impress all night with talks of expansion and growth, politely declined Finn's invitation to join their private meeting. His comment about preferring to network with serious professionals landed like a precision strike, and I watched Jax flinch at the words. The manager's rejection was public, witnessed by at least a dozen other attendees who were suddenly very interested in what was happening at our corner of the party. I accepted the conference room suggestion with grace, but insisted on stopping by the dessert table first. The team had no choice but to wait while I deliberately took my time selecting a macaron, examining each one like it was a potential investment opportunity. I could feel their anxiety radiating behind me as I debated between raspberry and pistachio, finally choosing both just to extend their agony a few seconds longer. The walk to the conference room felt like a funeral procession, with the team trailing behind me in uncomfortable silence. In the hallway, I caught Jose on his phone again, his voice carrying despite his attempts to whisper. The words, "Worse than that, she's been our lead investor this whole time," drifted clearly to my ears, and I filed away the knowledge that they were already spinning the story to outside contacts, probably trying to get ahead of the narrative. The universe provided another gift when two other startup founders recognized me in the hallway. They approached with genuine enthusiasm, asking about my legendary exit and whether I was taking new investments. I made sure to chat long enough for the team to fully absorb the conversation, watching Jax visibly cringe when one of them used the word legendary to describe my track record. The contrast between their respect and the earlier condescension was sharp enough to cut. I noticed Finn doing something on his phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen while he maintained forced eye contact with me. The way he kept glancing down suggested he was deleting something from the company Slack, probably comments that would look particularly damaging in this new light. Digital evidence has a way of surviving deletion, something I'd make sure he learned if necessary. The surprise of the evening came from Chen, their junior developer who'd been coding in the corner all night, avoiding the social aspects of the party. He approached me with an expression mixing embarrassment and determination, apologizing for his team's behavior, and mentioning he'd been wanting to say something for months. When he revealed he'd been documenting the team's problematic comments about female VCs and founders in his personal notes, I felt a spark of hope for the company's future. He started to show me one entry dated weeks ago about me specifically, but Archie intervened before he could share more. His suggestion that this wasn't the time effectively silenced the one person trying to support me, and I made a mental note about his priorities. Chen stepped back, but the look he gave me suggested he'd be willing to share that documentation later, away from his boss's interference. As we finally reached the conference room, I noticed Jasmine had returned from her bathroom exile but was hanging back from the group. She whispered urgently with Marcus, probably trying to understand the full scope of what was happening. Marcus, who'd watched me build Phoenix Capital from nothing, just shook his head with something between amusement and disappointment at the team's behavior. The conference room door closed behind us with a soft click that somehow sounded final, like the ending of their comfortable assumptions about who deserved respect in tech. They arranged themselves around the table like defendants at a trial, and I remained standing, keeping the power dynamic firmly in my favor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that matched the harsh reality they were about to face. Finn immediately attempted to reframe the evening, claiming they were just testing if I could handle startup culture. His voice cracked on the word testing, betraying the desperation behind his attempt at damage control. I pulled out my phone and began reading from the notes I'd been taking all evening. Each quote I recited made them sink lower in their seats. Python is just a snake. Burn rate happens at the gym. Rich housewife friends. The fluorescent lights seemed to grow harsher with each word, illuminating their discomfort like a spotlight on amateur hour. The head of the co-working space chose that moment to poke his head into the conference room. He mentioned he couldn't help overhearing earlier and asked if I'd like to speak at their upcoming Women in Tech event. The invitation hung in the air like a verdict, making it clear their behavior was now publicly known. I accepted graciously while watching the team process this new reality. Their toxic culture was no longer a private joke, but a public liability. Archie finally spoke up, but only to suggest that everyone had misunderstood each other and they should move forward productively. I noticed he still hadn't actually defended me or acknowledged the specific behavior of his team. His diplomatic approach felt more like enablement than leadership, and I made sure my expression conveyed exactly what I thought of his conflict avoidance. While they watched, I forwarded the term sheet and investment documents to myself, explaining I needed to review some things with my legal team. The implications were clear without being stated. Their funding was now in question. Jose attempted to argue that since they were just joking among themselves, technically nothing inappropriate had happened. His logic was as flawed as his understanding of workplace culture, and I let the silence that followed his statement speak for itself. Chen spoke up again from his corner of the room, revealing that 3 female engineers had turned down job offers after meeting the team. One had specifically cited the bro culture as her reason for declining. The revelation landed like a bomb in the room, connecting their behavior to tangible business consequences. I watched as the team began to realize their toxic culture wasn't just morally wrong, it was actively harming their ability to hire talent. I turned to Jasmine directly and asked if her comment about women coasting on their looks included the woman who'd funded their last 18 months of runway. The question cut through her defenses like a hot knife through butter. She shifted uncomfortably before admitting she'd had her own internship experience at a different VC where she'd been dismissed and ignored. She'd been projecting that trauma onto me, assuming I was another pretty face without substance. Her admission was raw and honest, the first genuine moment from any of them all evening. Instead of exploding or lecturing, I calmly explained how their behavior exemplified exactly why I invested anonymously. The tech industry's bias against women was so pervasive that revealing my identity often changed how founders treated me, either dismissing my expertise or suddenly fawning over me for the wrong reasons. I noticed Jax actually pulling out his phone to take notes, the first sign that my words might be penetrating their bubble of assumptions. Archie's phone buzzed with a text that made his face go pale. Their biggest client was asking about availability for their contract renewal meeting next month, clearly having heard about the evening's drama. The startup ecosystem was proving to be as interconnected as their codebase, with reputation bugs spreading faster than they could patch them. Finn broke his composure completely, admitting he'd been terrified of losing funding. His desperation had made him want to believe their investor was a traditional tech guy who'd understand and accept their culture. The fear in his voice revealed deeper insecurities about their company's viability and his own imposter syndrome. His admission cracked something open in the room's dynamic, shifting from defensiveness to vulnerability. When I stood to leave, Archie reflexively reached for my arm but stopped himself mid-gesture. His hand hovered in the air for a moment, the physical manifestation of his internal conflict between supporting his wife and maintaining his team's loyalty. The gesture revealed more about our relationship dynamics than any conversation could have. I presented them with a choice that felt more like an ultimatum. Phoenix Capital turning out to be her company really changes the power game here. They went from mocking the money lady to realizing they've been biting the hand that feeds them this whole time. They could maintain Phoenix Capital's funding if they underwent comprehensive DEI training and hired a diverse leadership consultant, or they could find new investors in a market that was increasingly valuing inclusive cultures. The team exchanged panicked looks as they processed the reality. In this funding climate, losing Phoenix Capital meant likely closure within 3 months. I revealed that I'd been taking detailed notes throughout our conversation on my phone, having learned to document everything after my own experiences being dismissed in the industry. My notes app showed timestamps for each problematic comment, creating an undeniable record of the evening. The realization that I'd been building a case while they'd been digging their hole deeper added another layer to their growing panic. Archie's phone buzzed again with worse news. The company's other investor, a small family fund, was reconsidering their position given the cultural concerns. The dominoes were falling faster than a failed deployment, each consequence triggering the next. I watched the team realize that their behavior wasn't just affecting their relationship with me, it was threatening their entire company's existence. I pulled up analytics on my phone, showing them data from my portfolio companies. The ones with diverse leadership consistently outperformed the traditional tech teams across every metric: revenue, innovation, employee retention, and exit valuations. Their bias wasn't just morally wrong, it was literally costing them money. The numbers didn't lie, even if their assumptions did. Chen dropped another bombshell, revealing he'd been offered a position at one of my other portfolio companies, but had stayed out of loyalty to Archie. Now he was reconsidering that decision. The prospect of losing one of their few developers who actually understood inclusive culture made the consequences even more tangible. I noticed Archie's jaw tighten at this revelation, finally showing some emotion about the situation. Archie admitted to me that he'd been letting the behavior slide because he was afraid of being seen as soft by his team. His need for acceptance had overridden his judgment, creating an environment where toxicity thrived unchecked. The admission was painful to hear, revealing how deeply the tech industry's toxic masculinity had infected even well-meaning leaders. Despite everything, I maintained professional composure, refusing to let them see how deeply their treatment had affected me. me. Years of navigating the tech industry as a woman had taught me that showing emotion would only be used against me. Instead, I channeled my anger into strategic action, using their own behavior as leverage for systemic change. Jose attempted another defense, arguing that their comments were about all trophy wives, not me specifically. The argument dug him deeper into the hole of problematic thinking, and I watched Jasmine physically cringe at his words. The team was fracturing along lines of awareness, with some beginning to understand while others doubled down on their defensiveness. I produced printed screenshots from my bag, tweets and LinkedIn posts from various team members about female founders and VCs. All were easily found through simple searches, creating a pattern of public misogyny that extended beyond just this evening. The physical evidence spread across the conference table like a map of their collective bias, impossible to deny or minimize. One by one, team members began to distance themselves from Jax and Finn, who had been the primary instigators. Body language shifted as people literally moved their chairs away from the two, creating physical distance that matched the growing philosophical divide. The team dynamics were restructuring in real time, like watching a Git repository fork into different branches. The shift became clear when Jasmine asked what I would need to see from them to maintain the investment. She deliberately said us, not them, signaling her alignment with the necessary changes. Her question opened the door for constructive conversation, moving from defense to potential solutions. My assistant arrived with perfect timing, carrying a folder of documents that contained Phoenix Capital's full investment history. The portfolio showed consistent returns and successful exits across diverse founding teams. Confronted with evidence of my track record, Finn admitted he'd been telling himself stories about successful women to feel better about his own struggles. His honesty was brutal and necessary, the kind of self-reflection that might actually lead to change. Outside the conference room, other party guests had noticed the lengthy meeting. Several people approached Archie's admin to ask if everything was okay, and word was spreading through the tech community like wildfire. The public nature of the confrontation added pressure that private feedback never could have achieved. Jax's attempts to minimize the situation faltered as each team member began acknowledging specific instances of problematic behavior. The collective memory of the team created an undeniable pattern that individual denials couldn't overcome. Stories emerged of casual sexism in meetings, dismissive attitudes toward female candidates, and a culture that celebrated bro behavior while marginalizing anyone who didn't fit the mold. A text arrived from another portfolio company CEO, revealing this wasn't an isolated incident. They'd heard similar complaints about the team's behavior at industry events, creating a reputation that preceded them in the worst way. The external validation of the pattern added weight to my position. This wasn't just one bad evening, but a consistent problem. I made sure Chen wouldn't face retaliation for speaking up, offering him protection through Phoenix Capital's network. The relief that washed over his face was palpable, highlighting how much courage it had taken for him to speak truth to power. His willingness to document and confront the behavior despite personal risk showed the kind of integrity the company desperately needed. In the main area of the co-working space, I noticed female members beginning to gather and share their own experiences with the team. An impromptu support network was forming, with women comparing notes about interactions that had made them uncomfortable. The individual incidents that might have been dismissed as misunderstandings formed a clear pattern when viewed collectively. Jax attempted to delete his earlier tweet, but my business partner had already screenshot and archived it. The permanence of digital footprints was a lesson he was learning too late. His frantic attempts to minimize the damage only highlighted how aware he was that his behavior was problematic. He just hadn't expected consequences. The company's only female advisor, who had been silent in previous meetings, finally found her voice. She revealed she'd been considering resigning for months, citing specific incidents that had made her feel unwelcome and undervalued. Her testimony added institutional weight to the individual complaints, showing how the toxic culture had infected every level of the organization. Word spread through the party that Phoenix Capital's mysterious CEO had been there all along, shifting how people viewed the earlier interactions. Conversations I'd overheard throughout the evening took on new meaning as attendees realized they'd been dismissing the very person they'd been trying to impress. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially those who'd made their own assumptions about my presence. My lawyer sent a formal notice documenting the evening's events based on my contemporaneous notes and witness accounts. The legal documentation established a paper trail that would protect both my interests and those of anyone who spoke up about the culture. The formal nature of the response signaled that this wasn't going to be swept under the rug or forgotten after a few beers. With their Series B meeting only 72 hours away, the team faced a stark choice: accept my terms for cultural reform or risk losing everything they'd built. The countdown added urgency to their decision-making, preventing them from using delay tactics or hoping the situation would blow over. Time pressure had a way of clarifying priorities. Archie's expression when he realized I'd been protecting him professionally while he'd failed to protect me personally was devastating to watch. The role reversal challenged every assumption he'd held about our relationship and his own leadership. His face cycled through shame, regret, and determination as he processed the full scope of his failure. The immediate stakes crystallized with brutal clarity. Without Phoenix Capital, they couldn't make next month's payroll. The financial reality cut through any remaining defensiveness, making it clear that this wasn't just about principles, but about survival. I watched them realize that their toxic culture had brought them to the brink of bankruptcy. I demonstrated grace by offering individual meetings with each team member to discuss their future with the company. The personalized approach showed I was interested in rehabilitation, not just punishment. I deliberately scheduled Archie last, knowing our conversation would be the most difficult and important. One by one, team members rejected Jax's attempts to minimize what had happened. They began acknowledging the real harm caused by their culture, moving from defensiveness to accountability. The shift in group dynamics was palpable, with peer pressure now working in favor of change rather than against it. Through Chen's documentation and the female advisor's testimony, the truth emerged clearly. This wasn't an isolated incident, but an established pattern. The evidence painted a picture of systematic bias that had been normalized and even celebrated. The pattern recognition forced even the most resistant team members to confront their complicity. This is absolutely incredible how she documented everything with timestamps while they kept digging themselves deeper. The way Chen Chen stepped up and revealed he'd been offered another job but stayed loyal shows real courage. Initial victory came as 4 team members committed to the DEI training and leadership changes. They signed up immediately, recognizing that action spoke louder than apologies. But Jax and Finn held out, clinging to their defensiveness like a life raft in a storm they'd created. Jax made one last attempt to salvage his position by suggesting I was too emotional to make business decisions. The gendered attack was so predictable it was almost boring, the last refuge of someone who'd run out of actual arguments. His desperation showed in the way he looked around for support that wasn't coming. The attempt backfired spectacularly when Archie finally defended me, pointing out that my track record spoke for itself. His public support, though late, marked a turning point in the evening. The team leader's alignment with change rather than status quo shifted the entire dynamic of the discussion. Natural consequences manifested as news of the incident reached the broader tech community through party attendees. The hashtag Phoenix Revealed started trending locally, with people sharing their own stories of underestimating women in tech. The public accountability created pressure that private feedback never could have achieved. Archie and I had our first honest conversation about how his need for acceptance had enabled toxic behavior. He admitted that he'd prioritized being liked over doing what was right, creating an environment where discrimination thrived. The conversation was painful but necessary, the kind of reckoning that either strengthens a relationship or reveals its fatal flaws. Unexpected support came from other female VCs who reached out with similar stories of being underestimated. The solidarity reminded me that I wasn't alone in these experiences, even though the isolation of anonymous investing had sometimes made it feel that way. Their stories reinforced the systemic nature of the problem, while also highlighting the growing movement for change. Using the accumulated evidence and testimonies, I presented a final ultimatum to the full team. The document spread across the conference table told a story that was impossible to deny or minimize. The weight of evidence created its own gravity, pulling even the resistant toward acknowledgement. The breakthrough came when Finn fully admitted his insecurity had driven his dismissive behavior toward successful women. His vulnerability cracked open the last walls of resistance, creating space for genuine change. The admission wasn't just personal. It revealed the deeper insecurities that often drove discrimination in the tech industry. Through Chen's testimony and the advisor's corroboration, the full pattern of the team's behavior became undeniable. Email records that Chen produced showed multiple talented female candidates had withdrawn their applications after team interviews, each citing vague concerns about culture fit that suddenly made perfect sense. The company's growth stagnation wasn't due to market conditions or product issues. They'd been systematically driving away half their potential talent pool. I presented the final evidence to Archie privately, pulling up Phoenix Capital's portfolio dashboard on my tablet. Company after company showed the same pattern, diverse teams outperforming homogeneous ones by margins that made his team's bias look like financial malpractice. His shoulders slumped as he absorbed the data, finally understanding that their toxic culture wasn't just morally wrong, but actively sabotaging their success. The team members who mattered, including Archie, accepted that change was necessary for survival, not just funding. They began discussing concrete steps, diversity targets, inclusive hiring practices, cultural assessment metrics. The conversation shifted from whether change was needed to how quickly they could implement it. Then Jax launched his desperate counterstrike. His phone buzzed with outgoing messages as he texted other team members, trying to rally them against what he called Phoenix Capital's attempt to control their company culture. He suggested they unite against the interference, framing my demands for basic professionalism as an attack on their autonomy. The desperation in his rapid-fire texting revealed someone watching their influence evaporate in real time. The accusation temporarily made some team members nervous about their autonomy, creating a moment of division. Jose's eyes darted between Jax and me, clearly weighing his options. The junior developers shifted uncomfortably, torn between their desire for change and fear of rocking the boat. For a moment, the room teetered on the edge of fracturing back into camps. Some team members wavered, worried about their careers if the company failed. Jose actually took a half step toward Jax, his body language telegraphing his internal conflict. The fear of unemployment in a tough market momentarily outweighed his earlier acknowledgement of the problems. I watched him calculate the odds, trying to determine which side would leave him employed next month. I had to navigate this crisis alone as Archie stepped out to handle urgent client concerns, damage control for relationships already strained by news of the evening's drama. His absence left me facing down a potential mutiny, drawing on every lesson learned from my own startup experience. The weight of the moment pressed down, but I'd faced worse odds before. I decided on full transparency, pulling up my phone to share my actual vision for the company's growth with proper culture. Not vague promises, but concrete projections based on real data from my other investments. I showed them how inclusive companies attracted better talent, retained employees longer, and ultimately delivered superior returns. The numbers cut through Jax's fear-mongering like a blade through tissue paper. The Series B lead's message arrived at the perfect moment, their endorsement of my approach tipping the scales decisively. They'd been monitoring the situation and explicitly stated that Phoenix Capital's continued involvement with the proposed cultural changes would actually strengthen their own investment thesis. The external validation from a major player demolished Jax's narrative about interference. We reconvened in the main space where the party continued, making the confrontation unavoidably public. No more hiding in conference rooms. This resolution would happen in full view of the tech community. The symbolic weight of the location wasn't lost on anyone. What had started as private discrimination would end with public accountability. Jax made one final stand in front of everyone, claiming he was being canceled for harmless jokes. His voice carried across the space, drawing attention from clusters of conversations. He gestured wildly, playing the victim while I calmly arranged my evidence on a nearby table. The contrast between his frantic energy and my measured movements told its own story. The final revelation emerged when I presented emails Chen had saved. Jax had been systematically undermining female team members' contributions in investor presentations for months. He'd edited deck after deck to minimize or remove mentions of work done by women on the team, attributing their achievements to male colleagues. The pattern was so consistent it couldn't be explained as oversight. The Series B lead sent another message, having reviewed everything, publicly backing my position on the importance of inclusive culture. culture. They mentioned this alignment with their own values and indicated they'd be watching the company's cultural transformation closely. Their message appeared on the screen I'd connected to the space's main display, visible to everyone at the party. I faced the choice of whether to maintain any investment in a company that had housed such behavior. The room held its breath as I weighed the options, knowing that complete withdrawal would mean certain death for the startup. The power to destroy them completely rested in my hands, and everyone knew it. I chose to maintain funding, but with strict conditions and oversight, showing grace while demanding change. The mercy required more strength than revenge would have. Anyone can burn bridges, but building better ones takes real courage. My conditions were non-negotiable: mandatory DEI training, diverse hiring requirements, and quarterly culture audits conducted by an independent firm. Jax realized he had no support left and announced his resignation, his words barely audible over the party noise. He gathered his things while the party continued around him, the celebration flowing past him like water around a stone. His isolation was complete. Even Finn, his closest ally, had turned away to study the new terms I'd presented. Finn started to follow Jax toward the exit, but stopped mid-stride, his internal conflict visible in every line of his body. He looked at the door, then back at the team, then at the investment terms on the screen. His future hung in the balance of this single decision. After a long moment, he turned back to the group, choosing his future over misplaced loyalty. Jax's final manipulation attempt fell flat when he threatened to badmouth the company to other investors and potential hires. The threat might have carried weight earlier, but now, with his behavior publicly documented and widely witnessed, everyone understood his credibility was shot. His reputation preceded him now, but not in the way he'd intended. I secured agreement from all remaining team members on comprehensive changes, and they signed the new terms right there at the party. The documents passed from hand to hand, each signature representing a commitment to build something better. Even the hesitant ones signed, understanding that this was their only path forward. In a private moment away from the crowd, Finn approached me with genuine humility. He asked for recommendations on female engineers, admitting he now saw what talent they'd been missing. The request came with an apology and a promise to do better. His transformation from skeptic to advocate marked a crucial turning point. The advisor agreed to take a more active role in rebuilding the company culture with proper oversight. She'd been waiting for this moment, armed with ideas and connections that could help transform the company. Her enthusiasm was infectious, already planning initiatives that would make the company a model for inclusive culture. As the party wound down, I noticed younger attendees approaching me for advice, seeing me not as a mystery but as a role model. They asked about fundraising, about navigating bias, about building companies that valued everyone. Their eagerness reminded me why I'd chosen to reveal myself tonight. Sometimes visibility matters more than anonymity. Archie took the microphone to address the remaining party guests, his voice carrying clearly through the space. He publicly acknowledged my achievements and apologized for not defending me sooner. The admission cost him pride, but earned him something more valuable: the beginning of redemption. His words were careful, honest, taking full responsibility for enabling a toxic culture. The complete resolution materialized before me. I stood victorious, having transformed a toxic situation into a teaching moment. The company would be restructured with new leadership and values, with Chen promoted to CTO and the female advisor as board chair. My marriage emerged stronger through honest communication, and my reputation elevated from mysterious investor to respected leader who handles discrimination with grace and strategy. I'd paid the price of emotional labor, but gained a company truly worth investing in, surrounded by a team that now understood supporting women wasn't weakness, but wisdom. The new narrative we'd written tonight proved that success doesn't require accepting disrespect, and that being underestimated can become the ultimate strategic advantage. The transformation was complete, the future finally aligned with values worth investing in. Time to close the book on this one, folks. Thanks for letting me share my clever quips and quick thoughts with you today.